1, we are going to broadcast. Yeah? Everyone prepared? So
Yes.
let's enjoy.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. So 3, 2, 1, we are going to broadcast. Yeah? Everyone prepared?
Hello, good afternoon. Well, as usually, it's a very strange situation because we don't know whether someone is really watching us or listening to our stream. But good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy and pleased that today I can welcome Every Ocean Hughes that accepted the invitation and took part at the Doc Questions series organized by Academy of Fine Arts in Prague. Obviously, yes, we have some attendees. That's great, and it's also broadcasted on YouTube. Obviously, it's the first time. For the first time that it takes place online, and the previous talks of Charles Esche and Ade Darmavan took place at our aula in Prague. Today we are a bit more dispersed. Every is sitting in her home in Stockholm and me in my flat in Prague. Nevertheless, we engage into the conversation and we will listen to Every Ocean Hugh's talk. And also, we would like to keep on with a small detail of the series, which is that after the talk, we kindly ask Every to draw us a dog as a as a poster for the next participant. Now let me introduce our guest, Every Ocean Hughes, formerly known as Emily Roysden, is an interdisciplinary artist and writer. She lived for long years in New York City. It's a place where LTTR magazine and projects were born in early 2000. LTTR was a queer feminist journal and the artist collective that generated various intellectual, visual, music, fashion activities that has been fostering Every Ocean Hughes artistic work. Every Ocean Hughes recent projects take form of performance, photographic installations, printmaking, text, videos, and curating. Her many collaborations include music and collaboration with The Knife, Colin Self and G.D. Sampson and Man and the group Man, costume design for choreographers Levi Gonzalez, Faid Driscoll, and the band Le Tigre. Every Ocean Hughes has received commissions for new works and solo exhibitions with Tate Modern London, Kunsthalle Lissabon, Secession in Vienna, and Participant Incorporated in New York. Her work was featured in the 11th Gwangju Biennale, the Biennale of Sydney Future Generation Prize, and the 55th Venice Biennale. Also Whitney Biennale in 2010. New York and Manifesta 8 in Murcia, Spain. And she has participated in group exhibitions in Museo Serralves in Portugal, in Cave, in Berlin, Institute for Contemporary Art in Berlin, Museum of Modern Art in New York, Moderna Muset, Malmö in 2014, and Museo Nacional de Arte Reina Sofía in Madrid 2010, amongst many others. In 2019 and 2020, she was a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Right now, Every Ocean Hughes resides in Stockholm, where she teaches, and she's professor of art at the Konstfack in Stockholm. So welcome Every, and we are listening. You know, it's difficult to create interaction. I had a long introduction. I'm sorry, and now, if I can, I would deliver the microphone to you.
Great.
And I would let you continue because it's a bit improvised situation, of course.
Excellent. Hi. You can hear me? It's good. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We are all dispersed. It's true. It's hard to imagine that there's somebody out there, but I think there are a few. I will begin to share my screen so we can look at these things together. And I'll go. Is that working? Great. Thank you. So my plan for today is to just introduce a very few projects shortly, and then to talk a little bit more about the current work on this series that I've been doing around the idea of queer death. Sorry, it might just take me a second to warm up here since I'm sitting by myself. But so yes, I'll introduce a few projects just for the people who don't know other works of mine and things that are related to the current work, so that then that gives us something to talk about. So I'm going to start with this. Sorry. Supposed to make sound, but it's not. Oh, there we go.
I meant you and me, I meant you, help you, help the dead, help me, help the dead. I commit to you, help you, help the dead, help me, help the dead. I commit to you.
Great. I wanted to just start with a song and a little to look forward to what the current work is. This was the most recent project I made called Help the Dead. And there's a clip from that I'll talk more about later, but I wanted to start there. And now I'm going back in time. So this is actually the very first work that I ever really made. Began the project in 2001, and it was called the Untitled David Wojnarowicz project. So David was one of the first artists that ever made me feel like I wanted to be an artist. And so what I did was I went back and I looked at his earliest, some of his earliest work, and he had made this mask of the French poet Rimbaud's face, and he wore it around the edges of New York City. So it was really about that identification with Rimbaud, with the figure of the outsider, and also what are the edges of society, the margins really. So I made a mask of David's face and reconceptualized for my generation what the questions were, thinking largely about like a genderqueer feminism, thinking about me identifying with David, who had an infamously diseased body. He died of AIDS in the early 90s at a young age of mid-30s. So I was interested in this like kind of troubling identification, and yet still articulating how productive it was for me to find his work, to be in touch with him through his work. So I made a mask of David's face, and then for things like where David had made photographs down in Coney Island, which would have been a cruising spot, or in the piers on the west side of Manhattan, you can see I kind of took this idea of the waterfront, and this was a flattened out, this is an advertising image in the East Village, which was like masking some gentrification. So I was also playing a lot with like kind of the flatness. So these are just two of the images from that series. And I think it's fun to start. I mean, these are really the first things I made, and yet they're still quite active for me. I showed them last year at the ICA in London in the Kathy Acker exhibition. So there's still something that that are alive in my life. But like I said, 2001, long time ago. And this is another image. So again, if in the last images, I was kind of playing with the flatness and the idea of the waterfront here, in David's image, it was most likely heroin in the needle. This is testosterone. So asking some different questions. So that's like very early work. I mimicked the form of his project, 11 by 14 inch black and white photos. And this is LTTR, and maybe I'll pause here and just say a very few things broadly. Threads that have connected my practice over the years. I'd say I have a transdisciplinary and conceptual practice. A lot of the work has engaged queer histories, politics of performance. I'm very interested in like questions about developing vocabularies and poetics, also related to questions of distribution and circulation. So I have like a history of making publications and posters and thinking about how music disperses ideas differently, and a lot of collaboration. So I'd say these are kind of some of the major threads that run through the work. You can see in the David Wojnarowicz project, and now jumping here to LTTR. In that top left corner, you see the first LTTR, which has one of my David Wojnarowicz projects photographs on it. So LTTR, as Vit said, we called it a feminist, genderqueer, independent art journal. It was also anti-capitalist. It had many identifications, which was part of the pleasure of it. And each one had a different shape, different format. The second one you see there in the middle, or the top middle, is listen, translate, record. It was in the shape of a record sleeve, an LP sleeve, and it was a poster. It also had an audio CD with everything. Somebody had made us like a pop theme song for LTTR, which is a really excellent jam. I can recommend that. And there were oral history projects, all kinds of things mixed on that CD. The third one was Practice More Failure. The fourth, Do You Wish to Direct Me? And then the fifth was Positively Nasty. We did these from 2002 to 2006, or something like that, maybe 2000 something like that. They were handmade artist multiples in each issue. We sold them for $10, later $15, but just to say that they were affordable, that we were very much interested in, in distribution. Other important things about LTTR was it was always initiated by an open call. So we would write an open call and send it out, and then receive submissions and curate the journal by a consensus process with myself, Ginger Brooks Takahashi, and Kate Hardy. And the group was later joined by Lanka Tattersall and Ulrika Müller. What else? So another thing, LTTR had a lot of energy, so anything that didn't fit on the printed page, we were doing a lot of live events also. This was from Art in General it was issue, geez, I should remember this. Other people, better historians, I'm bad with years, but anyway, this was at Art in General in New York City, and it was called The Explosion. And typical of LTTR, they had invited us to use their storefront space for 2 weeks, and we're going to give us $200. And we said, okay, we want to do it, but we want to use all 3 floors of your gallery for a month. So we transformed the invitation, and we still only got $200. But everybody, in the spirit of LTTR, people is very in this DIY kind of nature. We tried to raise some more money and also just shared the money we had evenly. In the top left corner there, you have Eileen Miles, a legendary American writer and poet. In the top right, that's Jack Halberstam, and the bottom is Greg Bordowitz. So we in an evening like this, we would have the performance right after this, mixed with somebody who was ecstatic and talking and reading. This is more of LTTR. This is on the left. That's Wu Sang, Ginger Brooks Takahashi, myself, Pony and Zyler Jane, some of the contributors of the journal. And then these are other images of performance works happening in the city. just to, again, show the spirit of the group. We were making our own merch and making bootleg copies of our own journal to sell in front of printed matter. Again, this is the early 2000s, so it was right on the cusp of kind of analog and digital. And this is an example, again, of LTTR working with installations and events. So we, I don't know if anybody out there is laughing, but that's funny. It's supposed to be funny. Lesbians tend to read. So LTTR, we were always making it stand for something else. In the bottom right corner, you see Lanka. And this was an installation we did in printed matter called A Wave of New Rage Thinking. And we also did these events called radical read-ins, where we would invite people to read a few sentences or that we claimed, you could claim had changed your life. And so then the bookmarker was an extension of that, where you could go into printed matter and see that somebody in the spirit of LTTR had like flagged or marked something on the bookshelf, and you could share that passage. LTTR, I also, is the first place that I was writing, and really writing at all. It's not that I was writing privately before I wrote publicly. I just started with LTTR. I'd had the desire and the idea to be writing, but it was with the spirit of the community, of establishing a community through this journal. That I began to write. And so on this image, Democracy and Visibility in the Dramatic Arts, that's the first thing I wrote in the first LTTR. And then on the left, I wrote an introduction to this text by Iqbal Ahmad. And he was a mentor of mine when I went to university, and he died while I was in school. And that actually kind of released me in a way, because I used to have what I called a use value issue. I thought I had to be useful. And I was maybe studying international politics. I was studying critical race theory, which led me to psychoanalysis, which led me to art making. But I started with Iqbal. And so then I wanted to bridge my early interests with my current community. And so I wrote an introduction to his text, How to Tell When the Rebels Have Won. And Iqbal, he had been an advisor to Yasser Arafat. He was best friends, if you could say such a thing, with good friends with Frantz Fanon and Edward Said and Noam Chomsky. And so he was a peace activist and a radical thinker, born in India, partitioned to Pakistan. When he died, he was trying to start an independent university in Pakistan. So I still hold on to Iqbal as a mentor. But this are examples of my LTTR writing projects, and also just how I began to write, which was in imagining a specific community, readers. Which leads me to Ecstatic Resistance, which Fit knows well. Boris, you're out there too. You guys know this one. So in the years that I was working with LTTR, we're also, I would be a young artist, a young person willing to be called a feminist, and so I was speaking on panels, and I started to use this word ecstatic resistance. And for several years, I was using it to describe this kind of set of interests that I thought LTTR was performing and that I was in general interested in. And so then I was given the opportunity to a commission from an interesting and generous place in the US that has since closed, called Grand Arts. And they said I could do anything I wanted. And I said, why don't I take this term seriously? What do I mean when I say that? So instead of producing my own artwork necessarily, I curated an exhibition, I wrote an essay, and I made this diagram. So to look at the diagram, we see in the middle, there's this gold disc, MVMT movement. And that's around these two pyramids, struggle and improvisation within the field of the impossible and the imaginary, all within a great pleasure stain, I call that. And then these terms are taken up in the essay, and I write more and talk more about them. This is one of the examples of the exhibition. It was in two places, one in Kansas City at Grand Arts, and then in New York City at the short-lived X Initiative. In the top image, you see a lot of Sharon Hayes's work in the foreground. And then in the bottom on the left is Juan de Villa, the Chilean artist who exiled to Chile. A.L. Steiner and Yael Bartana also in the bottom image. So like with LTTR is in a way, a publication and a collaboration, a collective project, but also partly a curatorial project. So I continued that interest, always working with others in different ways. This is the poster we made for Manifesta. English on one side, Spanish on the other. And again, interested in distribution. So I put my essay next to two others. The top Free State epitaph is from Dean Spade and Craig Wilsey. Dean is a lawyer and an activist. Just wrote a book about mutual aid and is the founder of the Sylvia Rivera Law Project for low-income trans and gender variant people in New York City. And Craig is a writer. And the bottom essay is by Catherine Lord. Yeah, so that's Ecstatic Resistance. Not sure, yeah. This essay has been translated quite a lot. I think it's in Czech. Somebody translated a few years ago, also German, Maori, this one Spanish, maybe some others. So those can be found if you want to read them in another language. And whenever somebody wants to translate it, they make a poster and are able to design it. So this is, again, like I'm moving pretty quickly here, just through a few early projects. This is a photograph of the piers on the west side of Manhattan. And they're a very important cultural place in the city. The history of the place. So this is as if you are looking towards, it's New Jersey, you see in the background, and the piers are in the foreground here. This image you see is looking south. So in the foreground, you have the remainder of the piers. That middle building is what the piers used to be like. And then the bottom, that's Lower Manhattan. So I took a boat out and shot these photographs on a very rainy day. And that's why they're so bleached. The piers, so as I said, were an important cultural place in the kind of the downtown Manhattan, and in general, like New York underground and countercultural scenes. The history of the place is that they were industrial spaces, of course, long piers for the going up and down the Hudson River, moving goods, and also, of course, the military would stop there. So there were a lot of sailors. And then what happened, this kind of few steps that transformed the area, are they built a highway. So it was just this West Street, a smaller street that went up and down the side of the city. And then they built an elevated highway. And almost as soon as they built it, it was broken. It was defunct. So they made off ramps that were too narrow. Cars got bigger too fast, and the off ramps broke. So this elevated highway became a boundary to the edge of the city. And it's, became a question of who would cross underneath it. Perhaps that was dangerous. And so what did you need that you weren't getting? What were you risking? So it became a cultural place. Like it was a lot of gay life and cruising, but also just people who wanted to live on the margins of society. You would cross over into the space of the piers. It's a very dynamic history. I'm happy to talk about it if anybody wants to. And here's just a contact sheet. It was such a pleasure to be out on that boat. It was technically illegal what we were doing because it was not long after the Republican convention was held in Manhattan, and it was anti-terrorism laws that you couldn't take a boat that close to the shore. But I did it. So this was a publication that I made that has some of my own images in it, but also then you see at the bottom that word Alvin Baltrop. So I first saw Baltrop's images when a friend of his submitted them to LTTR. And he identified as a African-American bisexual photographer. And he had been shooting photographs down at the piers for a dozen years. He started photographing in the Navy, and then when he moved back to New York City as a younger person, continued to be a photographer. In his life, his work was never recognized. Apparently, the story I heard was that he was told this work is too good, you couldn't have made it. So I was surprised when someone submitted them to LTTR, because I was like, I've never heard of this person. And I have an interest in queer photography. So I would have known, other people who would have been his peers in time, if not in social circles. And so I was interested. I got in touch with them and stayed in touch with them. And then eventually I was offered to make a commission for MoMA and the New York Artist Book Fair that Printed Matter makes. And so I decided that if nobody would publish Alvin Baltrop, that I would. So it's mostly Baltrop's work. And then I wrote a text that kind of goes from his work to mine, in which I then put a few of my peers' photos. But this work, of course, being another example of like looking into the queer histories and also the performance, of this place. I very much got interested in the questions of the history and what's visible. I want to show you this, but no, I'll go backwards. Sorry. So I went from doing this peers photos, making these, thinking about use and regulation, thinking about site specificity in this case. And then I was invited to Stockholm. So this, if you see on the left there, there's a person who's at a different positionality than the others, right? They're horizontal. I'll play this and talk a little bit more about it. So this was a project called Sense and Sense. And this is the central square in Stockholm. It's called Sergelstorg. The main train station, if you're looking at this image on the right, the busier image, the main train station, central station, is just off to your left. One of the things that really interested me about this place is that all public protests and demonstrations, they either start or end here or they happen here. So the place, it was built as a site for political demonstration. I was fascinated this as an American, that people would actually use a place the way that it was built, like for this purpose. And then what I noticed also is that it's, this is very Foucauldian of me, but it's a panopticon. So the site of the protests, it's one level below street level. So you can see up in that top right corner on the right image, you'll see sometimes the camera bobs, and there's, it's one level below ground level. So there aren't that many ways in or out of the space. So as a site for protests, you're kind of in a fishbowl, you're a little bit trapped. And I was interested that people wouldn't not have an adversarial or a fear-based relationship to that. And so I was also interested that it was, of course, in the way that it looks, its design. There's something in Stockholm where maybe on a poster that's in the subway, there will be a graphic image of this, like a few of these black and white triangles, and that will represent the city of Stockholm. You know what that means. That means center of Stockholm, Sergelstorg. It holds that as an image. So thinking about all of those things, thinking about like free speech, political movement, demonstrations. There you can see that it's below street level. I also was just watching it, and what do people do there? You see that they're leaving that train station and traversing it. So there's I took the common practice, the vernacular movement. If you know vernacular, it means like everyday movement that happens there, this kind of way that people walk and cross the square. And so then on the left, I asked my friend, her name's MPA. She's a very good friend and somebody I've worked with over the years, to walk on her side. I wanted to flatten out this idea of public movement, but I wouldn't let her practice. So I invited her and didn't tell her what she was going to do until we got there, because I wanted her to be thinking about how do you do it? How do you create the illusion of movement? So she's on her side, you know, and thinking through all of these things, like to keep her feet flexed, not to put your butt out because you'll lose the illusion of verticality, things like that. So on the left channel, she goes back and forth in different ways. And then on the right channel, it's one long pass, you'll see. I hope you can see this image. If the video quality fits, you'll let me know.
We can see it very well, actually.
Oh, great.
It really runs fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's Sense and Sense. I said this before, but if on the left, we're working with like reproducing this kind of illusion of movement in contrast to the bigger ideas of political movement and free speech. On the right, this image has context. You know, you can see the shape of the city around it, and the gesture is in a different context. And this is the poster for that project. So like I said, I like to make posters. On the purple side, on the edges, on the bottom, I can't stop thinking about free movement represented as an abstraction, the need to improvise. And then this thing like a square, nothing so stable makes for a good beginning. So I'm thinking here between like the idea of the public square and then the square, of course, as a shape, and it's as a graphic shape. And then the works here are Agnes Martin, 2 images by Agnes Martin, one by Jimmy DeSana, a queer photographer, that one with the person as the safety cones on their hands and feet. And then this smaller image is by Howardina Pindell, and it's like a soft grid. So it's kind of putting these visual references for the project onto the poster. And this was the first in a trilogy of works that kind of accumulated. I'm not going to speak about the other ones, but the posters and the vocabulary of the 3 projects like influenced each other over the course of a year. This is several years later. I think this is around 2014. This, I think, was 2010. And this is a sundial that I made in Portland, Oregon. There's a really excellent festival there called TBA, Time-Based Art. And it's by PICA, the Portland Institute of Contemporary Art. And it's one of my favorite things that happens in the US. Really good festival. And I was invited over 2 years. So the first year I made this sundial and held a series of public conversations. And then the next year further developed a series of artworks and an installation. This sundial is called Reading the Shade of a Pink Triangle. And there's a bunch of like lingo in there. So like if you can like read somebody, you know, you can throw shade. And then of course the pink triangle related to it was appropriated from the Holocaust and turned in and used by activists in the early 90s to represent gay power. So reading the shade of a pink triangle. It was the first time I used this upside down triangle with waves on top, which oopsie doopsie. Sorry, let me go back. You see here. So I was going to read parts of this text. I might not read as much as I'd planned because it's already running a little late. But I'll read a little bit of it, okay? So, number 1, I believe in an alchemy of time, that a certain combination of words, a length of inaction, a discomposed room, or with some such cipher, I believe we can make time. 2, in a memorial poem to Yeats, W.H. Auden wrote, "Poetry makes nothing happen. Nothing is the realm of uncounted experience." 3, uncounted experience, unseen in time. If only a wave in proximity to other waves. If only a wave that made a texture of a surface of a top of the line. If only a wave expressing the contour of a bottom, its bottom, the under. If only a wave of rhythm, all potential to break, crash, hit, rock, wander. If only a night wave peaking. If only a wave never counted, measured, if a threat. 4, in the same poem, Auden repeated but one refrain. What instruments we have agree, what instruments we have agree. I ask, what instruments have we? Beyond the will to measure, 5. 7, what is time if not activism? Maybe here I'll just read okay, I have to read some of this. 9, what if a museum becomes an authority on alive time? How does an organization built to historicize and exhibit work in aliveness? Practically, everybody's asking practically. Institutions discipline live time within an architecture of power. So how now, thinking through movement, what is an ethical way to authorize a live time? Number 12, collectivities instead of collections. Is this a question? Can we support collectivities instead of collections? 14, for the past while, I've been thinking about transitions, the shifting of weight, changing of direction, genders and governments, choreographic and interpersonal. Transitions, no matter the context, are a political moment, a chance to detach from weighted positions, a chance to be moved. What is a transition that is not a solution? What's a transition that's not a solution? So you see in this question of alive time and the question of what instruments have we, I made a series of clocks and calendars. So these are ceramic clocks. There's about 12 meters of them. So they can really create like a horizon line. And they actually work. So they're synchronized, telling the time. I've had more than one occasion where somebody was theorizing why I had made it this time in these sculptural clocks. And then after listening to them to a while, I said, well, that's actually what time it is. But I always like to hear their theories. So this is an example. This whole project is called Uncounted. So the whole series of works from the Sundial to these clocks, the calendars, and these series of performances. And I like to work for several years in the same kind of body of ideas, the same vocabulary. So in the text, I'm asking questions that can't really be answered. What is time if not activism? What is a transition that is not a solution? And just creating a field of references for those questions. And then also making objects and performances. And these things, they kind of are in their own little feedback loop, influencing each other. And so I used the text, I think, for about 5 years, kind of developing it and making artworks and exhibitions with it. this pink clock in the foreground. The ones that are pink, they're on wheels, so they're on these stands that can be moved around, a little more anthropomorphic. I'm not going to read all of this. That text is available on my website if anybody has any interested in it. This isn't one of the performances at the Tate in the tanks. This is Ayin Bailey on the right, who I'm performing with. Ayin is a researcher, an artist, and a DJ looking into the history of Black sound and Black music. So when I go to different cities to perform in this project, I work with different friends who I think might have investments in the questions I'm asking. This is in Berlin, and this Lehia Lewis on the left. She's a choreographer and a dancer. So this, I had invited her to. And what happens is somebody chooses one of the numbers. So the text is 23 pieces, 1 to 23. And then when I invite somebody, I ask them to choose any of the text and make a work in response to it. So this is also, again, a poster. On the right is the Sundial. It comes from the series, it's related to the series of clocks. I mean, no, sorry, the clocks to the calendars are made with this same vocabulary of this sundial. You can see that the wave shape there is actually from the arm of the clocks. But anyway, it's a photogram, and then the poster has the text kind of a little bit in a clockwise shape around the paper. And this is distributed at exhibitions and performances. People take it away with them. I always like the idea of where do we encounter ideas? My fantasy is always that people put my posters in the bathroom and, maybe on the door of the bathroom, and you read a different sentence every day, or maybe you read the same one every day. And this is the book. So I made a book that's in the same call and response structure of the performances. This was for the Secession in Vienna, where I also made one of these performances with Boris. Hi, Boris, at TBA. So on the left, I'm always very eager to name my collaborators. Marwar Sanios, Bobby Badalov, hey. A lot of wonderful artists and writers there. So now I'm finally getting to the part where I'm talking about this current series I'm working on. I have called the project Queer Death. I sometimes appreciate that as a phrase, and I sometimes do not. When I appreciate it, I think it gives you a lot of information quickly. And when I'm more reluctant about it, I don't like the idea that it would sound like a brand. I feel like we're in this era where like H&M or, like something like that. I say that because I'm in Sweden, but like H&M would say that it's queer. You know what I mean? Like, I think that this word is being fought for. It's still really necessary in a lot of instances. And yes, it's also absolutely commodified. So I feel differently about that at different times. But if I say queer death, you get a strong feeling, I think. And so I appreciate it when it's communicating that. So I've been working for the last 4 years in this project. This is an image of one of the workshops that I went to learn how to take care of a dead body and do home funerals. So it's like the opposite of a funeral home, where you keep the body at home, most likely for 3 days, have a vigil, invite people into your home, and then you would do the funeral as you wish. This is a cardboard box, so it's biodegradable. It's a non-toxic way of having a funeral, compared to the absolutely horrendous environmental practices of the funeral industry. And then on the left is an example of being shrouded. That's me. I volunteered to be shrouded. And this was my teacher, Jerry Grace Lyons, and she was in Northern California. Excuse me. So yeah, about 4 years ago, I started to attend these workshops. How to be a death doula, how to take care of the dead body and do home funerals. And also now I'm in a course called Contemplative Care, which is really like hospice work and how to be with, sit with, and witness the end of life. It's a 9-month course that I'm taking, and I really enjoy it and appreciate it and have a lot of enthusiasm for it, and love what I'm learning there. So I have been studying, and part of that is that kind of two things happened at the same time. One is that my grandmother died, and she was my sister and my mother and my grandmother all wrapped into one. She was a very good friend. And so I was able to be there and to take care of her with my mom and her best friend. So I've always said that I have 3 mothers. My mom, her best friend, and my grandmother raised me. So in the end, my mom, myself, and my mom's friend Midge, we were the ones who took care of my grandmother. And I had never done that before. I had lost several of my best friends died when I was young in different accidents. So I have lived with death. My first best friend died when I was 9 years old. His name was Ryan Sanchez. And at the time when you're young, you don't have any tools. You don't know how to deal with those things. And so I always knew as I was growing up that there would come a time in my life where I would have to think about this and reconcile it in myself. And so then when my grandmother died and I was able to be there and take care of her and learn a lot and witness a lot, I got onto this path where I realized that I've kind of always been an apprentice to death. Like if this my best friend died when I was 9, my best friend died when I was 16, a good friend died when I was 20. You know, if it kept happening to me, I felt like I'd always been an apprentice to death. And so why not take it seriously? And then the other thing that was in my mind those years was that I wanted to be of service and be of service outside of myself as an artist. I wanted to offer something. And maybe it goes back to that idea I originally said, use value issues, but it's actually more inspired by my friends who are, they're really activists. I'm sometimes called an activist artist. I really don't mind that, but I'm also not sure that it's true in that I, for many years, was really working with a vocabulary of abstraction. But I wanted to be of service. And then I realized this is what I can do. I can sit with this. I can live with this. I can look at death and not turn away. And I've been doing it in my life. And so I developed it. I wanted to develop further skills around it. So I was attending these workshops, and then my friend Barbara Hammer was dying. And I know Barbara. I know her. She's a legendary filmmaker. She was the first person to put lesbian sex on film, experimental filmmaker. Really energetic person up until the end of her life, very bold personality. And so I knew that she would want to be that way also in death. And I knew that I could ask her questions that weren't really necessarily gentle or let's just say that were direct. So I got in contact with Barbara and I asked her if I could interview her as she was dying, and she loved the idea. And so we wrote for several months, and eventually the only thing that we could kind of decide to do was to publish the conversation as an interview. And we did that. I worked with this really excellent designer. His name's Bryce Wilner, and he made this font for the website. And he also made a beautiful website where when you're rolling over the dates, it kind of layers. So you, like when you see January at the top, that's because I'm blue, I'm black, and Barbara's blue. And then when we've said the same thing or a line lines up, it's solid. Otherwise, we're half of the conversation, if that makes sense. So I made this, wrote an introduction, did the interview with Barbara. That was another work in the series. And then this is Help the Dead. It's this is on the left, Colin Self, and on the right is Gio Wyeth. They're both artists and musicians. And this is from KW in Berlin. This is Tony Carlson. He's a friend, and he was like our on-stage assistant and did the reading and part of the audience section. And now I'm going to try and show this video. So Vit, again, will you let me know if this is working? We're just going to show maybe the first 3 minutes.
Yes, let's try. I think it should work.
Yeah.
You and me, I meant you, help you, help the dead, help me, help the dead. I commit to you, help you, help the dead, help me, help the dead. I commit to you. I read somewhere that theater is about how people don't get along.
Oh, well, I read somewhere that accountability is about how maybe people could get along.
I read everywhere about extinction.
I read everywhere about public political deaths. The sharp edge of the state is the center of the state. The dying and the dead needing to be washed and buried.
I read somewhere that at the beginning of the crisis, it cost more to bury AIDS patients, that the funeral industry added tax for their own wretched fear, and the bodies were buried deeper. They were buried deeper, buried deeper.
Life, grab life from below?
Yes, yes, and yes. The dead act, the dead live on. We need them to tell our stories.
Okay, so on this spectrum between alive and dead, dead is not the opposite of alive. It's not a binary or a simple biological fact. It's a complex social choice. What is dead? What do we let die? Who do we let die? Who do we actively harm? What do we actively extinguish? And I just wanna get out of my own way. And I just wanna get out of my own way. And I just wanna get out of my own way. I just wanna get out of my way. And I just wanna get out of my own way. And I just wanna get out of my own way. I just wanna get out of my own way. I just wanna get out of my own way. Hi. We're going to
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. Can you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this was Help the Dead. It's part concert and part theater. It's 60 minutes performance. I made these glass sculptures you see in this image, and also the costumes, which are the pattern that was in the first slide. It says Help the Dead, What is Dead, and the New York Times. So I'll explain that really quick in that, you know, a lot of the questions are when talking about when you're working around death, you know, there's so many cliches, and then also such a perhaps also questions about the good death. And one of the things I wanted to make sure of was that we were also always talking basically about all other kinds of death, not just ways of producing a good death and facilitating it, which is very important and which this performance talks about, but also the fact that we're encountering every day in the newspaper violent deaths and deaths at the hands of the state. And I wanted to always make sure that that's within the frame of the project and that it's like, it's there from the beginning. And so I do that by saying the New York Times, right? Maybe that's a little American centric there. And I tried it with many newspaper logos and with multiple logos, but the idea just of like kind of standing in for the idea of news. And I wanted to incorporate that into this question. So I made this graphic pattern again with that designer Bryce Wilner, and I call these costumes like fancy aprons. So like kind of a worker's apron. And yes, and then there are the glass sculptures that were revealed. This is the surprise ending of the performance. So you get a hint of the surprise here. Yep. And then I wanted to just kind of open up where I am now. So I did Help the Dead, which I said part concert, part theater, focusing on the social aspects, death, dying, and mutual aid. So the performance, sorry, before, so you don't read that while I'm talking. So Help the Dead is kind of in 4 chapters. There's this introductory part, which you just saw a piece of, where I'm really introducing a lot of the things that I'm interested in, asking questions and writing around these ideas. And then we move into an audience participation section where I have written these characters. I love, you know, when you attend a workshop and everybody goes around the room and says, my name is, I'm here because of. I love those moments, but also when I was attending these workshops around like doing home funerals, of course, the people who show up are extraordinary. And so I wanted to kind of create that moment. So it goes from my question asking to the audience participation, which is also the audience arriving itself. Like, this is a limited capacity. I'm maximum 60 people sitting in this circle so that everybody feels visible and accountable to everybody else. And then you read these very short narratives. And then it goes into an actual kind of a fake workshop in a way. I present some of the actual information that I learned at the workshop. I'll put a link in the chat room and you can watch the whole 12 minutes. There's a 12-minute edit of the 60-minute performance if you want. So that's Help the Dead. And then One Big Bag I'm currently working on. It's a video. Haven't made a video in a while. And here it says, focusing on the materiality of death, concrete fact of the body. But what I'm doing is I'm, again, in attending these workshops, like I was interested in the idea that these death doulas, they always have a bag packed. The teacher that I was with, you know, she always has this bag packed in her car that is ready to go for like the newly dead. And so one of the first things you need to do when a person dies and becomes a corpse is put it on ice. So the bag is inspired by this death midwife kit, and it has really a lot of mundane household objects, and then things that are used, like mundane objects that are used in non-traditional ways, but also things like ice, things like scarves in case someone has committed suicide, you can hide the rope burn, things like all different kinds of bandages. There's a special kind of glue that is good for repairing autopsies. There's also things in the bag that are for human ritual, you know, like basically things for the living, candles, things like that. So I'm interested in all of the objects that are in this bag and basically what that's telling us about like how we care for the dead. And so that's a video. I'm working on that for the fall. And then I'm also working on this other project. Right now I'm calling it Service. And it's a performance, another performance and an installation that focuses on storytelling and myth as relates to crossings transitions. And here I'm really interested in the stories we tell, and in also like classical stories. And, you know, always like in these stories of crossings, people are like, you know, you're crossing a river, and the Greeks, like, you know, it's like, take a left at this bush, cross this river, and say this to the right person at the right time. I really love those kinds of stories. And so I'm writing a monologue that's basically, the character is one of the people who has the ability to cross back and forth. So of course, most of us, when we cross in one direction. We go from living to dead. We go from living to the community of the dead. And then there are some people, right, in stories and in myth that have the ability to cross back and forth. And then I'm also writing a text that is jumping off from Uncounted. So that text I read you a piece of, 1 to 23. I'm now writing another thing. It's in a similar spirit and written in a similar way. And it's going to be 23 back to 1. So if Uncounted is thinking about a live time, and now I'm doing a project around kind of dying time, I wanted to kind of bridge those formally. And this, I just thought I'd share a little bit about some of the vocabulary, some of the questions that are going into this text that I mentioned. I don't want to really go through all of them, but I'll put them up there for you. This unanswerable interrogation, that's sometimes what they call death. And in that way, it's kind of why I've chosen to make it a monologue. If that makes sense to you, you know, it's a one-way unanswerable interrogation. And then these are just some of the themes I'm interested in, some of the questions I'll be asking. Let's see, we're at 5:10 here. That's not bad, huh? Yeah. Maybe, did you have
take your time, Emily. I think
Okay.
it's great, Avery. Yeah.
Yeah, so these are some of the things I've been interested in. It was kind of hard for me to make this little edit here for you, because I maybe have 4 pages of writing around different kind of themes that I'm putting together for this. But I thought this was a decent small collection to give you the breadth. Some of them, again, kind of speaking more to my interest in like asking abstract questions. And then say the 2 at the end, the human psyche rebels against idea of its end. Civilizations walk blindly towards disasters because humans are designed to think tomorrow will be a lot like today. That's clearly referencing the environmental crisis, if you ask me. And then the status of the living dead, and thinking about those who are excluded from care, what in COVID times we're calling racial disparities, and how that, like in the performance of Help the Dead, you hear that one character say, you know, death is a complex social choice, you know, really relating that to this here, and thinking about, what happens to death practices during times of crisis around AIDS and COVID, and what is revealed. So I like to put these kinds of very political questions next to poetic and abstract questions, kind of threading them through to each other. The actual performance works, the new video and the new performance and installation, are more focused. But this text, when I write like this, I like to bring many things into the frame and rub them up against each other. And this will be our last song.
Just wanna get out of my own way, and I just wanna get out of my own way. I get out of my own way, and I just wanna get out of my own way. And I said, I meant you and me. Get out of my own way. And I just wanna get out of my way. And out of my way.
Again, that was Colin Self and Gio Wyeth. Making this project was one of my favorite art making experiences I have ever had. It was the first time I made a performance that I wasn't in, which was a total relief and a total delight. I loved knowing that I was writing for them and writing these songs that they knew each other and they were friends, but they'd never sang together. And I love when they're singing together. We were planned to do this performance a bunch of times in the last while, but of course, live work and nothing's been happening, as we all know. So I do hope to, maybe I can come do it in Prague, but I do look forward to being able to be with them and perform this work again. And really to, I'm continuing this series, as I mentioned. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll have any questions if there's people out there. Maybe, did I stop sharing? No, I did not.
Excellent.
You're going to see me again?
It was excellent talk. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe I will start with 2 questions, and then I would ask participants. Actually, I'm not sure if you can directly pose the questions by talking, or maybe the easiest would be if you can write it in the chat. So please write your questions into the chat, and I will read them. And maybe I will start with a question that is about what you described actually in your talk. And it could seem pretty contradictory. That first you were really dealing with the pleasure, with the principle of pleasure, and because ecstatic resistance, it was something deeply involved within the pleasure, and now you are dealing with the death. So one would say, okay, these are really contradictory principles or topics. But then when you think, you also mentioned psychoanalysis, and when you think about Freud, for example, Freud, he was really, early Freud, he was dealing only with the pleasure, and later Freud, he was dealing only with death and with the principle of destruction, death, and everything. So how is your relation to this psychoanalytical, so to say, theory or environment?
Yeah.
Are you related to it? Are you kind of correcting Freud where he was wrong, maybe, or what is your relation?
I stopped thinking about Freud a while ago, actually. I think in my early years, I would say, you could say influenced, but I was actually more inspired by. I loved the vocabulary of psychoanalysis. I sometimes, like, these 2 words would be rubbed up against each other, and I was like, that is weird, like, I loved what it produced. And I feel like that was one of my first, like, it was a really productive, creative encounter for me. I was, of course, reading like feminist and queer analysis of psychoanalysis before I ever went all the way back to Freud and Lacan, for example. But I did do that, and I did spend some time in that universe. But the older I've gotten and the longer I've worked, the farther away I am from it. And it's funny how little I think about it even now when doing this deaf project. I love that you brought it up, and I will have to think about it more, I think. But I've been really more interested in the kind of living, practical, social aspects of doing the death work and of sharing information with people, where like parts of Help the Dead are really quite funny. And so I think I thought that's kind of what you were going to say when we're talking about pleasure. It's like bringing pleasure and humor into the realm of death, which I definitely think it's there. Everything's present there. And so, yeah, I'm working on that.
Mm-hmm. It's important that you don't approach death from this finality, right? From the side of because you talk also about social construction and cultural model of different death. And yeah, one thing, maybe it's just kind of intermedia window, but I dig in my archive and
cool.
I found old issues of LTTR actually. Wow. And actually, what is really interesting that they are super nicely graphically done, right? There is a lot also of kind of printed small printed materials and graphics and prints and kind of artists. Yeah, and this I found also because it was at the time I was in New York. I didn't meet you, but I meet Keith Hardy, and I also got this, which is a T-shirt.
Good stuff.
Yeah. You see,
I'm gonna have to see you wear that one day.
I will. Hopefully, I will. So before we open the floor, the second question relates to your name, and because I have to say that when I wrote you an email, I made actually first time I didn't know. Formerly, you were known as Emily Royston, and I was a bit confused whether I should call you Every or Ocean or Every Ocean, and then I felt like it's embarrassing. I don't know how to properly call you. So my question would be actually, did you choose the new name? First question, and how did this or have affected the choice your life? And your life, meaning your life, private life and professional life, because an artist has a name. And I think it's also important indicator for an artist that you switch the name. Suddenly, all the exhibitions you did under the other name. Certain people don't understand. They don't know who you are now. So please tell us.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions there. Yeah, I can... I'll also share that when we stop talking. I wrote this short text about that, and I can share it in the chat conversation here.
Sorry, just the same question comes from Boris Ondrejka.
Yeah, I see that. Hi, Boris. Boris also said, can you tell us more about the momentum and urge of transition from Emily Royston to Every Ocean Hughes and how it differs? So I had a long thought about it. I had always kind of wanted to change my name, and I used to actually, funny enough, talk to my mom about it. We would previously shared a last name, Royston, which is my father's name, but I don't even really know my father very well. I haven't seen him in 17, 18, 19 years, a long time. So I thought, why do I have his name? You know, it didn't make sense to me. Like, and I was interested in these questions of lineage, but really, like, as Boris wrote here, urge. It was an urge. Like, when my grandmother died, I took her last name. So her last name was Hughes. So she was Welsh. And her father was a boat captain. So they took the boat over to America. And so I wanted to, as I said before, I have always had three moms. I thought, I'm from matriarchy. So why do I have the name of my father, whom I don't even really know? So I took her name. And then the Every Ocean part is kind of funny. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm going to try and tell you the truth, which is just that it was just there. It was just there for me. I didn't sit around thinking about it. I didn't struggle with it. It was like, I want to take the last name Hughes to be my grandmother's descendant, which is how I feel. And then I had a friend who's a very special, funny, weird, very weird person who she misunderstood my name. Like, we were roommates, and for over a year, she misunderstood what my name was. Like, I'm not sure how you can misunderstand your roommate's name for over a year, but she used to call me Every. And so I was like, yeah, that's cool, you know? So then when I wanted to change my name, it just felt like it was there. I just took it out of the sky. That's how I feel. An ocean, I wrote in this text, man, but that I felt like that was kind of like a special refuge for me. I wasn't sure that anybody else would ever really notice it, or, but people picked up on it immediately. So when I put out my, when I put out an announcement that I was changing my name, people just started calling me Every Ocean. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Whoa, I didn't know anybody would do that. And I loved it. So some people call me Every, some people call me Every Ocean. I really, I enjoy both. I also liked kind of, you know, there's of course it's like everybody, you know, it's like there's something there. And then another friend of mine who's a writer, Cyrus Simonoff, told me that it was also a sentence, Every Ocean Hughes, because if you spell hues differently, it's a verb. It's like the ocean hews a rock. It's a way to make a sculpture. You hew over time. Anyway, so it became like also this sentence that I didn't also predict that either. But thinking about changing it, like what that has meant, I was talking to a friend of mine, a curator named Adrienne Edwards. She works at the Whitney, and we were talking. I said, I'm going to change my name, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know if I have to have this big plan, you know, like, because like what you're asking with like the archive of my works and stuff. And she said, how about this? How about you do whatever you want and let everybody else deal with everything else? And I was like, ooh, I love that idea. That's an excellent option. And so that's what I did. I decided to just say yes, just step into it and see what happens, you know? And so I kind of embraced the mess of it. And I thought, I love the idea that if I met somebody, they wouldn't know that I'd been Emily Royston, or somebody could be looking for one thing and find the other. I liked being more than one thing. And also that's how I feel. Like I don't like Emily Royston is not a dead name to me, if you know what I mean. Like it's still like it's still active. That's fine. But yeah, I've had some like places contact me about if they wanted my name changed in their, you know, the registrar, the archive of the institution and stuff like that. And I went through this period where I was kind of both. I think for like a year and a half, at least 2 years, everything is just kind of both. And maybe that will continue, you know. But I also really liked just asking for it. I thought, yes, it can be messy, but it really tells you that I've changed. I feel like I've changed. I feel like I've made a choice for myself. And then I'm sharing that with other people. And I enjoyed that part of it too. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question related to your quote. You say that death is not the opposition of life. It's not binary or a simple biological fact. It's a complex social choice. For me, it was really elucidating. How did you come up with this idea, or did you find some connections or some sources that you approach death actually from this non-binary side?
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting that you picked up on that, because I do think for the whole, you know, the 30 pages of Help the Dead, which is a 60-minute performance, like that was one of the cruxes, you know, was to state that it's to move it away from the binary and to think about it. I feel like it's a real challenge I feel like as a writer, I'm challenging the audience when I say death is a complex social choice. It's not a simple biological fact. Because it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? You know, but it felt important to me to pose that. And I guess it comes from years of reading around the subject and just kind of like fusing together like these different, like maybe read like 1,000 kind of popular news articles, and things around death practices, and then also like history, theory, and poetry, reading kind of for 4 years around this topic, to kind of come up with that, I think. And again, I really like the idea that it's important for me to, I don't know, maybe I'll just say that I feel like there are other parts of the project that are going to speak more to that, to speak more to the fact that it's a complex social choice. And what does that mean, again, in terms of like health disparities and care? But then also to this idea of people being able to cross back and forth. And also the idea that that the dead influence the living, that, which they do, right? So is that really like death, so thinking about all the different resonance of what death can mean. And then I also, maybe also related to my name question, I like the idea that also you can think that there are many deaths, and that many deaths is just simply change. We're dying all the time. And so when I changed my name, and in the Help the Dead performance, there's the song that says, I just want to get out of my own way. It's like, I like to also put that in that realm of thinking that it's not a binary. Yeah.
For me, it's interesting because I was reading a lot last year about physics of particles.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, of course, this famous paradox of Schrödinger cat that is alive and death in the same time. So even the physics, which is the most materialistic and really empirical science nowadays kind of destroys this clear division in between clarity. But we have a question, and the question is from Sanya, watching on YouTube. Can you tell us more about the development of the new practices of care for dying and death in relation to COVID? Also, how it challenged your practice and research? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's, if I started looking into this stuff 4 years ago and then watching it unfold, these very urgent, very political, very tragic circumstances around thinking through death practices at this current time. I would say the way that they've changed is now in the more, is not intentional change. And I hope that wasn't implied, so, because you did say that, right? How have they changed in relation? So it's, did you say something, Vit? Oh, okay. So it's more like thinking about the ways, when I wrote that, I was thinking about how like there are, these trailers, basically morgue trailers, like up in different cities that are storing dead bodies in refrigerated trucks for long periods of time. But those are becoming part of the visual landscape. Another thing, when you start to think about like politics and death and media, we also, and just culture in general, like we see how much it's usually it's either spectacularized in terms of like violent, very visible death, and or it's like often very hidden. There's like a general incapacity of people to be able to speak about it, and then also like how when a human being dies now, often they're just taken away. Whereas for, centuries, families and people would care for the dead themselves in their own communities, and that there's something very specific and necessary for the human being, for a human body to sense that somebody else is alive. One of the things I've been reading about is that how hard it is for the mind to understand death, that you actually have to sense it. You have to feel it, you have to smell it, you have to be near to it to understand. And I feel like, you know, when we're looking at people having COVID funerals, about people dying alone, and how much trauma is happening around death now. So part of what I've been doing is like developing this skill set around it. Let me see though what you said, development of new practices of care. Yeah, so I feel like your question, and I wish we could have this as a conversation, but I'm happy you're on YouTube, but that they're not intentional practices yet, right? You know, right now people are reacting, and they're basically reacting to traumatic situations. And so we'll see how this changes death practices. But one other thing that's very been happening the last few years is that there's a lot of more attention to like eco death, you know, so you can be buried, you can basically just be put in the ground, you know, you can become a tree, you can have a tree planted on top of you, you know, they're making public land, they're trying to kind of also merge like saving land with making places for burial, because in general, you know, there's so much, there's like rainforest wood and steel and cement poured into the ground. That's another thing that's really changing, and that I think could change with this kind of mass death that we're experiencing. Yeah, thank you. I could go on and on about that, obviously.
This I heard exactly about the seat. There is a capsula, degradable capsula, and there is a seat, tree seat inside the capsula. So a body becomes a tree. Actually, dead body becomes a tree.
Yeah,
right?
feeds a tree. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I wanted to put that in there. That's for, oh no, I should put this to everybody. This is the link to that video that we didn't watch all of it, if you want to watch that.
I suppose that there will be also a lot of differences about legality, because you mentioned, for example, this coffin that is hosted at the home, and I think in Czech Republic, for example, this is legally hardly possible.
Yeah.
That you actually can host a dead body, legally speaking, because
Yeah.
it can be only under surveillance of the funeral company for a couple of hours, but I think that there's a lot of legal
it's entirely a legal question.
legalized in
Yeah.
different countries, right?
In the US, it's different state by state. So it's very specific to where you are. Yeah, the people who are activists in this field, you know, of course, it's a, you know, it's a capitalist issue, which is, it's not a health and safety issue, which is why you can't keep a dead body at home. You know, it's a question of like controlling the industry. Yeah.
So we wait if is there another question or a remark or acclamation or deception or any kind of expression coming from our colleagues? If not, I would like to thank you very much, Emily.
Thank you.
Every Ocean Hughes. I have to. It's yeah. Thank you very much.
It can take time.
Yeah, it was a great talk, and I hope actually to see you in Prague and to see the performance that you mentioned. That would be fantastic to bring it to Prague, to come and realize it. Thank you very much. And,
well, thank you. I always love seeing you.
Have a nice
Thanks
rest
everybody.
of the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.